People start,
I'm gonna move out of the video very
I couldn't see you, I can only see you.
It's fall.
Shine, you
How
couldn't see
tall
it.
is too short?
No, there's packets.
There, from my point of view.
Ouch.
You can see the shiny parts of this head. Wait till next week. I get the buffer. Can't wait to see it.
All right, does everybody had a good weekend so far?
Yes.
Yes, maybe, no, don't want to answer.
Yes.
There, you got a few guys. All right, well, we are studying lesson 8, talking about dancing and looking at our moral issues. We got down to looking at point 2, talking about what the Bible says, the use of the word dance in the Bible. And so we looked at 3 different things, and really I was saying about this some more. It really could fall under 2 different things, because some of the same phrases under the religious dance that was seen in the Old Testament, if it was associated with religious, is actually goes very similar to some of the expressions of joy. I think of Jephthah, when he came home and his daughter met him with timbrels and dancing. It's the same phrase used in the book of Psalms. And so it really could be, I guess, categorized into 2. And then we looked at the expressions of joy. And one of the examples, I want to go back to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15, verse 25. This was in the parable of the lost son. And Luke 15 and verse 25. It states, now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And so we talked about this. It's an expression of, could be in the realm of expression of joy. If you look at that word, it means joy. It means dancing, as in what we were talking, as we're talking about dancing. It also means it has this idea of a choir. When you think about choir, and if you look at I hate to get English, because I don't know English very well, but when we were in school, we had to go through and look at verbs and stuff. The verb there is heard. And it says heard, singing and dancing. And so it is in relation to how can you hear dancing? Can't. So more likely this word is associated with that joyful sound that he heard, the singing and joy of the people, the choir, the group of people singing with joy of the lost son coming home. And so that fits in with that. Then we looked at the lustful dancing. We looked at Exodus 32. They were dancing and it was shameful. New King James or King James even says they were naked. The things that they were doing. This was in relation to their idol worship. What were they worshiping? Exodus 32. Yeah, the golden calf. And if you look through the Old Testament, when there is a talking about idol worship, that is associated with it in the Old Testament. Then we get to the New Testament, and we looked at Matthew 14, verse 6, which we're going to talk more about. And that is where Herodias was dancing before Herod. Now, this is the only places we see dancing talked about in the New Testament, and it's categorized into 2. We don't see any other. It's either an expression of joy, or it's looked at as a lustful dancing situation. And so, does anybody see anything different? Looked at different passages? All right, so we can see that the Bible does not give us a passage talking about the dancing as we would see today in a good light. It's looked at in a lustful situation, or the dancing is related to in what we would say joyful expression of joy. And so let's go back to our book and let's read paragraph 4.
sensuality, to follow the excesses of sexuality, or any indecent bodily movement. Paul, by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, said that it is wrong to do things that sexually arouse anyone who is not your spouse. Does dancing arouse sexual feelings? It certainly does, especially in young men. Most boys who are honest will admit they have impure thoughts while dancing. If dancing does not involve sexual stimulation, why don't the men dance with each other in one room, while the ladies dance with each other in another? A proper understanding of the word lasciviousness and recognizing it as a work of the flesh rules out dancing for Christians.
Okay, so the word lasciviousness. Now we've looked at this word 3 different times, 2 different times. We looked at it when we talked about pornography. We talked about it when we looked at premarital sex. And so lasciviousness, the definition of it, it's stated here, the definition is sensuality, to follow the excess of sexuality or indecent bodily movements. A better definition and a more descriptive definition, if you go to back to the outline, and under paragraph 2, it's defined as wanton manners, as filthy words. We don't use the word wanton anymore, but that's used in this definition. Indecent bodily movements, unchaste handling of males and females. And so the word lascivious, and we talked about it in the use of pornography, it's that filthiness that's associated with it. And then you have the idea of lust. Now, Don Blackwell stated it this way, and it really sums up this word. It's conduct that excites lust. Lasciviousness is just drained in lust. I mean, it's what it encompasses, is that idea of lust. And so you can go to Matthew 5:28, which we're going to, and talking about that exciting of lust. But when we're looking at the word lasciviousness, it associates things that excite a person's lust. Now, lust, we've talked about, is sinful, right? What does lust lead to? Okay? You know, we think about the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus talked about that. Matthew 5:28 is the introduction to talking about divorce and remarriage, because of what a person's heart, what a person thinks in their heart can do, the action, the outcome of that. And Jesus stated that it could lead to divorce because of a person looking at in the sense of Jesus talking about a man looking at a woman and having thoughts that are improper, that are incorrect, has already committed adultery in his heart with her. And so the next thing he would do is act upon that. And that's where Jesus starts to talk about. And so with the next section on divorce. And so when we're talking about lasciviousness, it's conduct that excites lust. In the context of what Jesus talked about in Matthew 5, it was leading to adultery. When we talk about lasciviousness in the subject that we're talking about, it's a conduct that excites lust. Lust then leads to sin. And so actions that excite that lust, conduct that excites that lust, should be avoided. So let me read, Galatians 5:19-21, which is a passage we've read several times, but it includes that word there. Galatians 5:19-21.
Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like, of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God.
All right, so lasciviousness is included in this list of things that are works of the flesh, that are sinful actions. And what is the outcome of these actions? What does Paul state there?
Will not inherit the kingdom.
Will not inherit the kingdom of God. And so conduct that excites lust should be avoided as a Christian. We talked about those Christian principles back in the first part of this study, those principles that show us that we are to be different, that we are to be a called out people, a holy people, pure people. If we're doing things that excite lust in our minds, is that having pure thoughts? Is that having purity in our minds, in our lives? No. And so let's apply this to our subject. What does dancing involve? Does dancing involve indecent bodily movements? Honestly, does it? It does. Does it involve unchaste? Now the word unchaste, it literally just means sexual. So the sexual handling of male and females, is that included in dancing? It is. That handling, does that excite lust? From the guy's side, it does. And just to be honest, when we were talking, we're pretty frank in this class with this subject, with the subjects that we're talking about, but it does. In guys, it does. And so if the bodily movements of a guy seeing, or the sexual handling of each other excites lust in a guy's mind, and I would think it does in a girl's mind, is that lasciviousness? Yes, it is. Now think about it, a lot of times, what is dancing? It's involved in a dark lit room. And so think about this, if dancing involves indecent bodily movements or unchaste handling, it is wrong. Now, can we call dancing that is at a prom or any dance decent bodily movements? The dancing that happens at, let's say, parties, we've talked about that, or even a prom, can we consider those things decent bodily movements? Or decent, or chaste, not unchaste, but chaste handling? We can't. Honestly, we can't. And so it falls under lasciviousness. Now think about this. Somebody read 1 Timothy 5 and verse 2.
Older women as mothers, younger women as sisters, with all purity.
Okay. And so they are told to teach the young men to treat the older women as mothers, and the younger women as what? With all? Sisters. With all what? Purity. And so can we put unchaste handling, can we put indecent movements, can we put those things into that idea of purity that Paul's talking about in 1 Timothy? No. A young man is to treat young women with purity. And so that would not include lasciviousness. And the thing what we're talking about, it does not include dancing. Now, is there a dancing that does not have indecent bodily movements? I'm just asking the question. Is there a dancing that does not include indecent bodily movements?
Square dance, maybe.
Okay, square dance.
If you go back to I don't know what it was, the medieval big dances they had where they didn't really necessarily touch.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
I know it shows it in
I think they're
movies,
called
but
Yeah, and I thought about,
back to that. I mean,
I don't know, I thought about that, and I thought about what Ron said about the square dancing. I had a
A lot of kicking going on.
lot of kicking going on.
line dance.
Line dancing.
Oh, yeah.
Dancing.
Square dance.
The ballerinas that dance by themselves.
Yeah. And with that, if they're not indecent movements,
I mean, they're not being handled, but
Yeah.
people are observing them.
mm-hmm.
Then you might
So-
get into the indecent clothing, because
Which we're gonna talk about.
Once again, back to medieval.
Back to
Everything's
medieval.
better.
Now I had,
The dress is like 500 times bigger than you.
The corsets and, yeah.
yeah, it's like wearing a robe then, right? I thought about that, and I had it's interesting. I had a man that just became a Christian when we lived in Newton, He talked about square dancing, not the medieval, but it kind of fits in that same category. But he'd only been a Christian for he's in his 80s, but he'd only been a Christian for only 3 or 4 years at that point. And he said back when he was younger, he was a bouncer. And he said he was a bouncer at these clubs, and he said the clubs then, back when he was younger, was square dancing, was couples. It was married couples dancing. And he said you would be surprised how many people had to kick you out of those places. And he said the reason was because of jealousy. You had a guy start dancing with another guy's wife, or date, or whatever the case may be. He said, I had to kick so many people out in those things. And so I think about that. Now, in the realm of dancing, is a dancing between a husband and wife unchaste? Is it indecent for a husband and wife? No, it's not. Now, in a group setting where other people may be observing your wife moving or things like that, or get into a situation where couples start getting mixed up, whatever the dance may be, there is a problem there. So, is it wrong for a husband and wife to dance? No. Don't tell Holly that. I don't want to. We've talked about that. But, that's the thing, is it wrong for a husband and wife? No, because the things are not unchaste, because they're married. What we're talking about is those impure thoughts. Can you have impure thoughts about your wife or your spouse? It's not impure because God designed those sexual things between a husband and wife, not between two unmarried people. And so, in that sense of a husband and wife dancing, there's nothing wrong with it.
I think a lot of what we're talking about in general, all of these things, comes to, God helping us helping us from ourselves. Because this leads to this, this leads to this, this leads to this. It's the same principle, but in the end goal is to not create lust, which is the ultimate, going to lead us down the wrong path, but
That's right.
to start, and still, this leads to this.
But so can sitting in a movie with your arm around your girl and kissing her and.
Not just your wife.
It's your wife. But if it's not your wife, that's right.
You're right. Yeah.
That's right. And that's why I'm saying.
I'm talking about the dating scene, we got teenagers, that's gonna be dating.
Yeah.
And I mean. Well, she used to sit over there.
She's talking about Aaron over here.
But I'm talking even Tate and Lance and those kids, they're getting up there.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people think that.
And it's not like Justin's gonna ride in the car with Tate to make sure they're not touching.
But that does.
Is that what you do with Beth?
There's a lot
Go with her?
there's a lot of people that do believe that they have to have someone with them when they are on their dates.
Which we talked about that with.
Oh, did you? Sorry.
Well, we talked about it a little bit with our last subject with that premarital sex, and so avoiding that. And the dating scene is tough. And then we talked about there's got to be a point where you can trust your children to do what they're supposed to do, and that's right. You can't chaperone them in everything they do until they get married. It's not going to happen. And so we have to train and teach them. But as Justin is saying, what God is trying to do, He's not making rules for us because He's going to sit back and laugh and say, they're missing out on fun. God is giving us these things to keep us pure. Because you think about 1 Peter chapter 1. 1 Peter chapter 1 tells us, be ye holy is what? As God says there, it's a quote. Be ye holy as I am holy. If we want to be where God is in heaven, if we want to be in the church that that Christ has died for, we have to be pure. We have to be clean. And we do that by the blood of Christ, by becoming a Christian. But to stay pure, we have to stay away from these things that lead us to sin. And so you think about lasciviousness, it doesn't just include dancing that we talked about. It includes in the dating scene. There's the touching, the making out, things like that. We talked about that. I think the book said petting. we see those things excite lust and lead to sin. That's James chapter 1. And so dancing falls right into that. It is not wise, and scripturally it is wrong for what we see, because it will lead to sin.
Isn't it funny how we look at the boundary and we're like, how close can I get to that boundary?
Mm-hmm.
And I do the same thing. It's like, okay, this is not. We're over here talking about the boundary and what's right and what's wrong, but it's our mentality being human. How close can I get without, it's our mentality. And it's not necessarily right. I'm not saying it's right. It's just like, well, can I do this but not this? Well, it's here, but we want to push the envelope.
Yeah, and I think that's human nature, to push the envelope in a sense. And so that's important that we look how we approach the scriptures. Are we looking for how close we can get to the edge, or are we looking at how we can be pleasing to God? And that's how we approach it. And so lasciviousness. Now, you get into, which we already mentioned, we kind of got talking about, what about how a person is dressed in those situations? It was brought up. We talked about the fact that you have the arrivals to prom. Now, are the dresses that are being worn, most of the time you're not really saying much about the guys, because the guys are wearing what? Tux or whatever the case may be. And in our culture, it's not about exposing things, exciting lust in guys as much as it is women. And so the dresses that are worn to these kind of things, are they good?
Lack of
A
dresses.
lot of them aren't.
A lot of them aren't.
I'm not gonna say all of them,
All of them aren't,
but
yeah,
most of
exactly.
them are not.
Exactly, most of them are not. Why is that the case?
Because sex sells.
Sex sells. It's all about getting attention to myself in some ways. You think about, you watch a movie and they're going to go to a club or something. Are they dressed very appropriate? No. And so dresses are usually low cut. Males and females are holding each other closely, rubbing their bodies together to a rhythm of a suggestive music. And so you have the combination of the touching. Then you have, for a guy, the combination of the sight, of what he's seen. What does that do to a guy's mind? Well, it excites that lust. And so modesty is another issue. Somebody read 1 Timothy 2, 9 through 10.
In like manner also, that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing, but which is proper for women professing godliness with good works.
All right, so this is in the context of talking about modesty. And so this doesn't just refer to dancing, but it refers to any setting where modesty is an issue. And so here it says that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel. Paul knew that he needed to address it on the women's side, because now, does that always mean that men are always appropriately dressed? No. There are many times men are not appropriately dressed. And so this can relate to them too.
Shorty shorts.
Yeah, shorty shorts.
Or
Or no shirt, things like that. And so and we're talking about this modesty here, the word modest used by Paul here means to be well arranged and decent. Paul says that men and women, specifically talking about in the context of women here, are to dress themselves in a well arranged and decent apparel. It says with propriety. Now, we don't use that word, but that word in the King James is shamefacedness, I think it is. Shamefacedness. The word really means a sense of shame. What does that mean? To dress with a sense of shame.
Not showing your body.
Not showing your body. Having a sense of, I don't want to show parts of my body that should not be seen by anybody but my spouse or myself. And so, does our society have a sense of shame in the way they dress?
Most
Many
of them not
don't.
anymore.
Not anymore. You know, it's wintertime. It's a little different right now. Everybody wants to cover up because it's cold. But when it gets warm out, does that change? Yes, it does.
See, it used to be over at school, I mean, it was even in the handbook, that your shorts had to be so long, the width on your shoulders had to be so wide, like when they wore tank tops, they could not wear spaghetti straps. They had to wear like a 4-inch strap across their shoulder, and they just, I mean, there was even an issue on the neckline and everything, but now you won't find that in the
And that's sad.
handbook.
That's sad. Because it should be.
It was hard to enforce. I mean, we sent kids to the nurse all the time to get cover-up clothes.
Yeah.
And of course, we always tried to give them the worst clothes that we could find, so that they, wouldn't have to do that, but still, it was just a constant battle.
It is. In Bible camp, we have rules on dress too, and it's difficult. We have some of the women counselors will bring clothes with them, just in case, because they know that's going to happen. And they're like, hey, okay, you're not wearing that. And a lot of times, which I've heard, that's all I brought. Like, well, this is what you're wearing this
Or I'm
week.
so tall, I can't find shorts that are long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's that, and that's the thing, is sex sells in our culture. And so that is, it's more about drawing attention, exposing as much as possible to get that attention, especially on these apps, TikTok, things like that. If you expose things, what are you going to get? Views, likes, whatever the case may be, which that leads to popularity, money, things like that. We have apps that are for that. And so when we're talking about having a sense of shame, Paul says men and women, in the context what we're talking about is women here, Paul's specifically talking about, we are to dress with a sense of shame. Shame if I expose things I shouldn't.
I can remember the first time that somebody broke the code of dress a girl did.
Yeah.
She came to school with a body skirt and it was above her knee, and she got in quite a bit of trouble at school. And she was in my class,
Oh, yeah.
so.
Do you know how many years ago that was?
And I remember it was in 1964.
Oh, boy.
Back in the old days.
That was the first time that somebody wore a skirt above her knees.
You realize that was 20 years before I was born, right?
Yes, I do.
It's way more before I was born.
Well, and that's the thing, is that things have changed so much in our society. And you talk about the hippie age, in a sense. There's a lot of things that were bad going on then, but it wasn't as socially accepted as it is today.
They were trying to get girls to come and roll their skirts up around their waist, but they would be sent to the superintendent's office and they would roll them back down.
Yeah.
This girl didn't have anything to roll down. Hers was made that way, and she came to school that way, and she got in trouble, and her mother had to come and get her.
Yeah.
She was kicked out of school for the day.
Now,
Yeah.
they still do control PDA, they don't allow anybody to
I
kiss
don't know
or
about that.
hold hands.
That's
But,
not true.
I mean,
Not in
if-
Kathy's class.
That's
if
what,
it's
that's,
seen,
that's what
no,
teachers
if
think.
it's seen by the teacher.
Yeah.
But I mean, they're always gonna test that rule,
Well, that's what we talk about. It's kind of nature to test things a lot of times. And so, yeah, it's going to be tested. And so, we talk about modesty, and like I said, we're going to talk about modesty, I'm pretty sure, in this book some more. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but Paul talks about having that sense of shame, to be well arranged, decent, and to have self-control. The word moderation there is having self-control, understanding what I need to wear and the way it is. And so what's interesting is the way God shows us that our clothing are to be. Adam and Eve did not have enough clothes on, did they? They made themselves clothes out of fig leaves, and it was not enough for God.
But that wasn't until after they bit the apple, right?
Yeah,
So like
before
before
that.
that, it was normal to them, they didn't know any different.
yeah, they did. Is because they were in a situation of sin until sin entered the world, and then they noticed that they were naked, which at that point was just him and her. And so, yeah, it's an interesting thought. Was, if there were no sin, would that have continued on?
It'd just be a big nudist cult.
Yeah. That would be interesting.
Why
But
they
you
had to put
wouldn't
clothes-
know that it was.
Yeah, and you wouldn't have known at that point.
And there wouldn't, you know, in the end, we're all trying to protect from, you know, the lust part of it. There wouldn't
Yeah.
be the lust. There wouldn't be that without us knowing the difference. I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
It's kind of like having a small child who runs around naked. They
Yeah.
don't know any different. That's how it hasn't been put into their
Yeah,
brain.
they don't have that thought of the lustful. And all little kids do that. And so, yeah, that's right. But, you know, I think God knew, because in that point it was just Adam and Eve. And so it shows us that there's nothing wrong with that for husband and wife. But I think God knew that sin was going to enter the world. He had a plan before the world began. And so that's when lust came in. And so the word that God used there for coverings, it's a Hebrew word. It means a garment that covered from the shoulder to the knees. And so God's idea, God's actually a approved clothing for God was from the shoulders to the knees. And it makes sense because it covers up those things that should not be seen. And it makes
You
sense.
can have shorts you're wearing, and you sit down, it doesn't cover your knee.
Yeah.
Just letting you-
That is interesting. We have the rule at camp that it has to reach your knees. But, you know, if you're sitting down, it shouldn't be going way up here. It should be right above your knee in a sense. And so that's just the rule we have at camp. But it's not a bad rule to follow. And so we see that's God's approved example of covering from shoulders to knees. Our clothes are not to be too short, too tight, or too revealing because of the same idea. Just because they're short or revealing doesn't mean tight cannot be something also. How we dress, does it affect the opposite sex? Can it? Yes. Now, does that alleviate the issue of the person looking? No. They shouldn't think those thoughts either. But also the way we do dress can affect others. And so our Christian principle teaches us that we are to be different from the world. It means dressing different and acting different, and dancing is included in that. Continuing on, let somebody read Matthew 5:28.
But I say to you that whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart.
Okay. And so we know, we've talked about this many times, is that lusting and what it leads to. Jesus is talking about the heart lusting, and then it leads to adultery and the issues with that. Dancing is sexual in nature and arouses that lust. This is a quote from a book Sandra Humphrey wrote, Don't Kiss Toes. She stated this: "No healthy man will deny that it is sexually arousing to watch a girl swing her hips and breasts suggestively to music." And that is 100% correct. No guy can say that does not excite lust in their minds. And so we talk about dancing included in that, or associated with that. Now let's go to Matthew 14. This is where I wanted to get to. This is one of our examples of lustful dancing in the Bible. Matthew 14, and let's start in verse 6. Somebody read verse 6 through 9.
But when Herod's birthday was kept, the daughter of Herodias danced before them and pleased Herod. Whereupon he promised with an oath to give her whatsoever she would ask. And she, being before instructed of her mother, said, Give me here John Baptist's head in a charger. And the king was sorry, nevertheless, for the oath's sake, and them which sat with him at meat, he commanded it to be given her.
All right, so we have Herod. Herod has his birthday. The daughter of Herodias chooses to dance before him. And so we're seeing a situation where you have Herod, his friends sitting around and eating, and you have Herodias coming and dancing before him. She was dancing and moving in a suggestive way. How do we know that? Well,
He was pleased.
he was pleased. The word here, pleased him, It means exciting emotion. And so what exciting emotion was happening here? Well, we all understand that. He was sexually aroused by what she was doing. Now, would it have been different if he was dancing with her? Not just watching it? If she was dancing that same way, but he was dancing with her.
Are they married?
No. Actually, Herodias was in a way somewhat of his relation. So we don't want to get into that, but it was terrible. Herod was not a good person, and his family was not. But if he was dancing with her, no, it wouldn't have been any different. Would it made it better or worse? It wouldn't have. Now, notice what that exciting emotion did. Look at verse 6 again, or actually verse 7. Therefore he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. We're going to talk about oaths in the sermon, and we're going to go to this example a little bit. But he made an oath. He made a promise. He said, I will give you whatever you want. Does that sound like a man that is making a choice correctly? Or thinking about his choices? No. And so here she gives him what she wants, and that's John the Baptist's head on a platter. And notice his reaction. The king was sorry, nevertheless, because of the oath, and because of those who sat with him, he commanded it to be given to her. He regretted his decision. Now, exciting of lust leads to sin. That's James chapter 1. Does sin bring about a regret? Things that excite emotion will lead to sin, which brings regret. He regretted his decision. He regretted what she did, and being pleased by that, and not making the correct decision and having the right reaction to her dancing. And so think about that in a teenage situation. We have two teenagers dancing. They're excited in their lust. Are they going to make the best choices after that? No. It's going to lead to disaster. Just like with Herod. It led to a disaster. He didn't want to kill John the Baptist. He liked John the Baptist. He didn't want him killed. And yet he regretted that decision. And so Don Blackwell had this quote. We're about out of time. Somebody might say, well, I just don't buy the idea of dancing and being sexual. It's just fun. There's nothing sexual to it. If that is true, then why don't we have father-son dances? There are father-son ball games and father-son campouts, but you don't see father-son dances. If there is nothing sexual about it, why don't school officials let the boys dance in the cafeteria while the girls dance in the gym? We all know that would be the end of the party. The world understands the sexual nature of dancing. You know, this is getting, this, in a sense, this argument illustration against dancing doesn't always, it's not holding up as best anymore because we do have homosexuality being such a big deal in our world today. But in a normal setting, are you going to have a dance where you have guys in one room and girls in another room? No. Especially for the guys, they're not going to dance. And so that means it's not going to happen. Why is it then that it has to be a guy and girl together?
It's society.
Yeah.
Well, some of society.
Some of
There
society.
are some cultures that they do full male dances and full women dances.
Mm-hmm. And looking back at some of the examples we looked about with David, when David was dancing, he was by himself, there was other men around. You have the women dancing, praising David for his accomplishments.
It's Indian culture does that.
Yeah.
They have males that do their dances
They do
at
a
weddings
dance
and
to-
stuff, and then you have the women do theirs.
Mhm.
They're doing a dance to praise
Their
God.
their gods or whatever, the idols. But that's right. In those cultures, they do. In our culture, we don't do that.
We just please
Because,
ourselves. We just try to please our God sometimes, which is ourselves.
Which is
sometimes
ourselves.
Instead of what it should be.
it's right. And I'll finish with this one. In one study, another quote, 44 boys were asked what their feelings were toward young ladies with whom they danced. 41 of them, 93%, said they thought about sex. In an audience of 1,500 men were asked, how many can dance and not have evil thoughts? No hands were raised. In another study, 80% of men admitted to having lustful thoughts while dancing. The point is, dancing stimulates sexual thoughts and feelings and violates what Jesus said in Matthew 5 and verse 28. And so that's some interesting quotes, and it's true. No guy can deny the truth of that. Really can't. And I'm not a girl, so I don't know how the girls feel about it, but I can about guess it's close to the same thing.
I don't know where I read it. It might have been Facebook with a member of the church that wrote it, but you know, in a lot of instances at dancing, men will get close to a married woman because they know that's the only place that they could do it. If they were to walk up to the street, they could not get that close to a married woman or someone that they know that they can't have, and touch them in ways that they can't when they were not dancing together.
Yeah.
You know, I've read that somewhere, which is true. I mean, that is both men and women, I should say that. But, you know, dancing would allow them to get close to a person that they know they could never get close to.
Yeah. And you think about it this way, if you took dancing and you had two people dancing and you took away the music, I mean, is it right then too, doing the same things? No, it's not. And so we'll talk about some more Wednesday. We'll finish up. I think hopefully we'll finish up Wednesday and we'll move on to our next topic. Any questions or comments? If you do have questions, please don't hesitate to ask.